welcome to another episode of the Agnes Wilson Show. And I am very pleased today to have two people on board. We're going to be talking about one of the forgotten continents, Asia, and what's happening there. And I have Dr. Limeng with me today from California and Omar Khan from Sri Lanka. So I'm going to let you both introduce yourselves. Dr. Yan, you can go first.
Hi, Ka. Thanks for having me. And I'm Dr. Yan. I am the MD and also the PhD, and also I'm a virologist. I worked in the University of Hong Kong WHO reference lab, and also now I'm the independent coronavirus expert. Another my well-known identity actually is the whistleblower of the COVID origin. So based on all my stories later on, we will let people know that since the early beginning of this whole outbreak happened in Wuhan at the end of 2019, I get involved into the confidential investigation about this virus. And what I found actually revealed all these kind of strategies from the Chinese Communist Party. And later on, because of all the things I have done, make them angry, I have to escape from Hong Kong, and I managed to came to America, keep doing this. And also after that, I published 3 year reports talking about how it happened, why, and who has done it, all these things. And I'm also very happy to come to your show today to share with your audience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yan. Omar, welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm currently in Sri Lanka. I'm American by citizenship, born in Cairo, of globetrotting diplomats from Pakistan, having been in nursery school in Germany, kindergarten in New York, then Kuwait, then Saudi Arabia, the Netherlands for high school, then to Oxford, then to Japan, then to Stanford, back to New York, got married in Houston, came to Sri Lanka, Dubai, Singapore again, and then so the world turns. Sri Lanka is a second home, but Asia is really our focus here. We've also spent time in Hong Kong, spent time in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. I was never thought I'd be talking about COVID. I'm a global consultant, and in order to advise our clients, I had to educate myself about the seminal challenge that was defining everybody's lives. And so inadvertently became a COVID researcher. And the more I dove into the narrative, the more I realized that it made no sense. And therefore I hooked up with people, thought leaders like Dr. Cole, who introduced us to Dr. Yan, and people like yourself, who you interviewed me, I think, when we were speaking at the African Health Summit. And so here we are.
Thank you, Omar. It's so nice to have you both on. So we wanted to touch upon what happened in Asia and what's going on there right now. And I know, Dr. Yan, you have, I just want to get into your story first because you have such an interesting story. But so what made you, I mean, in the beginning of this whole pandemic, what made you think that something was going on more than was being conveyed through the mainstream media? What made you think that, what happened for you?
Because of my role in the WHO reference lab. So first, I obtained my medical doctor and also PhD degree from 2 top medical schools in China. So I have my very unique and extensive network based in China, from hospital to laboratories, from China CDC headquarters office to the local, that kind of both civilian and military places. So when the beginning of the Wuhan virus came out, although I was in Hong Kong, but on 31st December 2019, if people remember, they can remember that Dr. Li Wenliang from Wuhan started telling people that there is an unknown SARS-like virus came out in Wuhan, which is dangerous. And that is also the day I was assigned by my supervisor Dr. Liu Peng in the WHO reference lab and also his WHO expert asked me to do the confidential investigation to understand what exactly happened in Wuhan, because Dr. Li was silenced, and also China government doesn't want everyone know the truth. So from that time until middle of January 2020, I went through my network, so I get a lot of firsthand evidence about this virus and what exactly happened in China. And also based on my understanding of the Chinese government, because I was born and lived there for over 30 years, and also combined with my knowledge, my expertise in this field, the final result I got made me super shocked. And it proved that this is not from nature, and Chinese government was launching the actually the bio attacks, which is using their gain of function novel product from the military lab, SARS-CoV-2. And that is the things change everything. And I have to let this message out, because at that time, still Chinese government tried to hide, because they want to secretly spread this all over to the world. And also WHO, including my boss, they are helping Chinese government corrupt it. And so that was very urgent. And finally, I have to make decision to let people know what happened.
Thank you. And after that, after you started making it public, what happened? Because you said you had to flee to the US.
I actually at that time cannot make myself in public, because I was in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong belonged to China. And that time, especially in 2019, they launched that anti-democracy, that kind of activities in China. And I have seen so many of the Hong Kong people, when they try to fight against the communism government for the basic freedom, human rights, they were disappeared. And also from the beginning of my investigation, I was again and again warned by my supervisor, if I don't keep silence, if I cross the red line, I will be disappeared too. So I made my decision to find some person I think would be the trustful person online. He is anti-Chinese Communist Party YouTube blogger based in US, Mr. Luder. And I managed to contact him. I spent 2 days to explain all this evidence to him. And finally, he helped to deliver this to the world, because he has a very huge audience, millions based in China, and also Chinese people, and also Chinese government, like Xi Jinping's office. They really care about this broadcast. So when they listen to that, they realize the insider came out, delivered the truth. So they have to quickly change a lot of strategies, which to a certain extent really actually kind of root their strategy, their plans. So the virus actually was spread all over the world later than they thought, and the damage is kind of reduced. But after that, because I keep doing this and sending the this kind of information in real to this medium every day, so 3 months later, I received the warning that Chinese government decided to disappear me. So either I have to escape by taking the risk, or I will be there and just gone.
Wow. And one last thing before I go over to you, Omar, why do you think the Chinese government would want to let out a virus like this into the world? What's your thought on that?
So clearly, when they studied this, they put a lot of money and human effort, and it took over decades. So it is not joke, it's not for fun, and it's not just for scientific purposes. Trust me, that's Chinese Communist Party. We know how bad they are, but we always cannot imagine how evil they are. And more research I have done, actually, even until now, I'm still working on review the evidence with my scientist team and also many other people. who are helping to obtain the document from China. So there is a very clear evidence show that Chinese Communist Party, they won't counter the world using the Marxism, Maoism ideology. And this is very, very aggressive. So they know they have the huge distance away from America and other very developed country in military power. However, the bioweapon actually for them is comparably cheap and convenient. And it took a lot of labor force. However, in China, they always have enough labor force. So finally, actually, Chinese government has made sure this become their national bioweapon strategies. And they really, because focus on this, so until 2019, they thought that based on coronavirus, this novel bioweapon actually is kind of prepared well. So that's why they decide to use it. And the outbreak in Wuhan actually is because they try to do that, but based on their documents, they mentioned they have to optimize it. And at that time, if you check all the record, you will realize in Wuhan, in that area, Chinese military has combined with civil scientists, doctors, or other people, launch a lot of military drills against emerging infectious disease, especially novel coronavirus before the outbreak. So this is actually some kind of unexpected outbreak out of control from their military drills, or you can call it neighborhood trials.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yan. We're going to get back to more on this. Omar, how do you feel? You've been in Sri Lanka during this time, and Asia is also a continent we don't hear so much from. China is maybe in focus, but still it's hard to get information. How has it been in Sri Lanka and the rest of Asia, if you know of other countries there too? And how do you feel that your government has responded to the COVID crisis?
Remember, I'm not Sri Lankan, so they're not my government.
Okay, in Sri Lanka.
I've just been passing through. So yeah, with a very close view of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, where we also have an office, Singapore, where we also operate, Malaysia. So quite a bird's eye view. But I mean, just to start, I mean, first and foremost, I'm an American, and with an American lens on, it was very clear that there was duplicity afoot, gain of function research being funded out of Fauci in coordination with China. When you look at what I just wrote about, this event 201, which was the simulation done at Johns Hopkins of a coronavirus pandemic, in that simulation out of South America, it was the head of the Chinese CDC who attended, and it was a Dr. Gao, I believe, who then went and announced that there were something out of 1.4 billion people, 27 people suffering from a new form of pneumonia to the WHO, which is not exactly earth-shattering news unless you have an agenda. And within weeks of that, we had the fake PCR test by Drosten, ready to be peer-reviewed by Eurosurveillance. Of course, he was also on the editorial board of that journal, which is Banana Republic stuff. Yeah. Most such peer reviews take 6 to 8 weeks, if not longer. It was 48 hours. And as I wrote in my recent article, they were all very psychic, clearly, because WHO already on their website, a week before the approval, had this test up and said it should be the gold standard, even though Gary Mullis, who created the test, pointed out it was never designed for diagnosis. And as Dr. Peter McCullough keeps reminding me, every one of the tests has paperwork that says not for diagnosis, not for asymptomatic testing. And those are the two things we decided to use it for: mass asymptomatic testing and for diagnosis. So I just want to say that from the beginning, this reeked to me and was implausible. And the fact that Asia, you know, if you look at Asia and you look at Africa, it's very interesting. But if you look at Asia, you have 60% of the world's population. And up until mass vaccination started, we had 16% of the world's COVID-ascribed fatalities. Whereas the US and Europe had 16% of the world's population and over 60% of the world's ascribed COVID fatalities. So I always wondered why people were following a playbook from the places that had the most disastrous outcomes. Why did anybody give a shit what Fauci and the UK had to say when they had terrible outcomes? When you look at Africa, of course they say, oh, they don't report. Yeah. Well, I asked, I mean, do you think there's 20 million corpses lying around Asia and Africa? No, I'm afraid not. And the only difference is they don't test using that fraud test nearly as much. And so I have to say, initially, Sri Lanka had the worst reaction because we had a 24/7 curfew. Now, there are lockdowns, but this was a 24/7 curfew in a country that had barely, at that time, 25 fatalities. So this wasn't even a circuit breaker. There was no circuit to break. And like a lot of countries that missed the first wave and thought they got off easy and that they were at zero COVID, they got hammered subsequently. I think what has changed and what has positively evolved is that all around South Asia, India used ivermectin in Uttar Pradesh. It used it in Goa, it used it in Delhi. And if you contrast that with, say, Kerala, which has some of the smallest population, but some of the worst results and did not go that route. Bangladesh, who if you just have to watch a lockdown in Bangladesh to start chuckling, it looks like a bullfight in Europe. These people swarming and teeming around. Pakistan's prime minister said it very clearly. He said, poverty kills as definitively as a virus. And he said, I can't afford to just, I mean, he said, with the virus, you have a chance. With the poverty and, you know, starvation, you don't have a chance. And so early on, I started saying that bankruptcy is not a medical strategy. And I think with Sri Lanka, two bits of good news. One is that we have, by getting people like Peter McCullough and Jay Bhattacharya and Pierre Corey and Tess Laurie to present, gotten the decision makers to the point that they are allowing for out-of-hospital early treatment. And that's wonderful. Ivermectin, though not recommended, is not banned. Yeah. And they have started doing targeted shutdowns, brief ones, more frequently than the national suicide with the bungee jump without the bungee that had become their preferred modality. So that's an opening little, view, and we can dive in wherever you want.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just thinking about, you know, first this virus comes out and a lot of people get sick and you know, we see deaths, you know, from this, and then comes the vaccine that's supposedly there to save us all and get us back to normal. And you know, here, I mean, we know a lot about the vaccine rollout and the aggressiveness of it, but how has it been in China, for example, and in Sri Lanka and Asia in general?
Dr. Yan, you want to talk about vaccine rollout in China, and then I can talk about it maybe in a few other countries?
Sure. Actually, Chinese government claim they don't use the mandate, but what I get all this kind of information from China everywhere actually show that the Chinese Communist Party officials use every way to push people and even kids to get mandate vaccines. For example, the kids, young kids go to primary school and they have to show the certification that all his or her grandparents and the parents get vaccinated already fully. And also there was treatment if you get diagnosed, and also you get like the, for example, close contact. If government finally identified you, they will isolate you, and also they will give you treatment, especially like the hydroxychloroquine that was widely used in China, because they know based on the SARS-1 experience, different articles all over the world have shown that chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine can significantly improve this kind of treatment. And it's not magic, but it's cheap and useful. And even I can tell you, the military scientist has applied repurpose using hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine to treat COVID-19 back to February 2020. And this become their top outcomes in Chinese Communist Party's anti-COVID trophy, and get top awards from Xi Jinping. So in China, they have also used some other very terrible way, like inhuman lockdowns, and also other different type of the cover-up lies to control this disease. However, the government still know that if this virus actually cannot be well controlled by this method. So that's why they have now pushed people to get a booster, and even some people get the fourth vaccination, but still recently we see the case that they called breakthrough against the Omicron. That means vaccine doesn't help, and it brings a lot of side effects, which is even more dangerous.
So I can talk about some of the other countries to reinforce what Dr. Yan's saying, because it's pretty much the same. One of the big shocks was when Dr. Corey and Dr. McCullough presented to the Texas Senate and to different parts in the US, and they said that never in medical history have you ever been told don't treat. I mean, nobody ever has been told don't treat until they're blue in the face and can't breathe and are about to die. And so, Dr. Cole, for example, said that if there's a pandemic, it's a pandemic of undertreatment when people are in the early phases, especially because with HCQ, with ivermectin, both of which are WHO essential medications. Ivermectin is called that explicitly. Both have been around. I mean, HCQ, God knows when, from the 50s, I think. Ivermectin from the 80s, billions of doses, and even on the WHO database, vigiaccess.org, you can see virtually no adverse effects. And their own website shows over 2 million, which is an undercount in terms of the vaccine, so-called. The second problem with the vaccines, if you look at Singapore, for example, Singapore was moving along beautifully. Then they had an outbreak of migrant worker cases that shot up the caseload to close to 50,000. But unvaccinated Singapore had 38 COVID-ascribed fatalities. If you now go and see where they are, in the many hundreds and more since mass vaccination, it would be hard to argue that unvaccinated Singapore or unvaccinated Vietnam, which had no fatalities, linked to COVID, and now are in the 10,000 plus. It is hard to look at an instance in Asia. And this is why the Japanese, I think, are showing wonderful leadership in saying that, yes, we encourage vaccination, but no mandate, no discrimination. And ivermectin has been useful. We recommend its use. It's data-based. And the Japanese, of course, also were lockdown light throughout. They never fully locked down. Every time people said, oh, there goes Japan, they're in a state of emergency, they didn't realize that the state of emergency under Japanese law is just the only way the prime minister can make any kind of limitations. He has to call a state of emergency. It's not a big deal. It's not what it sounds like. It's just how their constitution obligates him to do anything that is not prefecture-based. And so when you realize, I was talking to Dr. Chetty in South Africa, and he made a very simple point. He said, these are not vaccines. They don't stop infection, they don't stop spread. So they're essentially therapeutics. And if you're a therapeutic, then you should compete against the efficacy and safety profile of an HCQ, a doxy, an ivermectin, vitamin D, and they would flop. I mean, they would fail. I think the saving grace in some of the countries, and I won't say which, is they didn't all use the mRNA vaccines. So they used, a variety of vaccines, which were probably useless, but at least they weren't injecting spike protein into the bloodstream. Now, funnily enough, because they have too much of that, they're making everyone do boosters. And it's really funny. There is no medical research I'm aware of. And I talk to a lot of people. And Dr. Yan, you can tell me if I've got this wrong. There is no medical study of how safe it is to mix different vaccines. So when they're telling people, oh, if you took Johnson & Johnson, now just go ahead and take Pfizer, no problem. You don't know that. And we see a lot of adverse effects taking place, maybe not because of that, but you can't rule it out.
Yes, yeah, you go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Yan.
Yes, Omar, as you said, there is no data to prove the safety of these vaccines, no matter from what company, because I worked on the universal influenza vaccine development in the WHO lab for over 5 years. And I have my universal influenza vaccine patent on pending in America too. I can tell you all the vaccines, you can see the good data from the cells. However, when you move to animal, you see a lot of fail or a lot of adverse effect, which you need to change and spend more effort to do the investigation again. So it took years and years to go to one step past to the next step. And then when you move to the human trials, again, trial one, over 90% of vaccine candidate will get failed. And then 10% keep moved to trial two, again, they get failed. All these things. But what we have seen from SARS-CoV-2 is even back to January 2020, when I was still in Hong Kong, I was told that just the right ground application to tell people you can do vaccine and then you get money to support your work. That is very huge attraction for all the scientists in this field. At that time, I can get, if I apply, there will be a Gates Foundation and there are Chinese Foundation. There will later on other foundation. It's basically they run to you to give you money if you show them that you can make some vaccine. I refused that because I spent time work into this kind of development, and I realized that there were a lot of obstacles in making SARS-CoV-2's vaccine because very simply, we never had any SARS-1 vaccine successfully go to clinical trial 1 over decades. And SARS-2 is a bigger version of SARS-1 with more function, especially hiding in the spike proteins designed by Chinese government to target people. And there are a lot of contradictory, that opposite functions. If you want to equip in the vaccine, you may finally make another function worse. So all these things took time. However, we later on see many labs of pharmaceutical companies, they try to tell people, we have our vaccine. And this vaccine go magically, quickly into the all this kind of market without actually real license. They are still under emergency use authorities in America and also in China. And even funny thing, in China, they are using inactive vaccine, which are even worse than what people are using in America. And the label on the box clearly show for clinical trial only, but people get even boosted. All these are big problems.
So how are they able to pass? I mean, how are they able to pass this? How are they able to actually administer these vaccinations? Because, you know, we've read a lot about it, and a lot of people and scientists and doctors have spoken out about this. They're still in a trial phase, an emergency use. And there's been some questioning about the one that was approved in the end, because when you look at that, I think that one is not even out in the market. But how could they pass this?
But Aga, the answer partially to your question is, it's not on a medical basis. I mean, the trials, even the trials we've had, are a joke. I mean, it showed a 1% efficacy improvement in already fairly well people. Nobody seriously sick was in there, nobody above 75. They've now jabbed all the placebo group, so you don't even have a control group, which is absolutely unheard of in the history of medicine, because you want to see over time the difference in evolution between the control group and the jab group. That's not possible. And you've got a situation where with the boosters, nobody has any idea of how the human body will respond to this much spike protein. So the fact that all this keeps happening, where in the past, if you had 7 deaths or 10 deaths or 20 deaths, you would stop a whole rollout by saying it's unacceptable. And now, as somebody said, C19 vaccines are now the leading cause of coincidences. So the fact that people drop dead, right? Oh, you can't prove it. So it's clearly based on what RFK Jr. in his book, The Real Fauci, talks about, that they control 57 to 60% of global funding. So when you do that, and why do they use the word vaccines? Because it makes people think it's safe. If you said therapeutics, or if you said something else, then people would have a very different reaction. So I think what we have to look at is that while clearly from Dr. Yan's testimony, China is a leading exemplar in the wrong direction, we can hardly say the moral conscience of those in the US or certain parts of the US or certain parts of Europe are clean, because they're not. I mean, this is just not even a close call. I mean, 5-year-olds getting jabbed? On what statistical basis when they don't even pass on infection?
No, China started to do the vaccine to 6 months kid now. They are working on that. This is kind of test trial, and they will promote it soon.
Yeah.
Will this vaccine even be able to pass as a vaccine in the future? Because it's totally not. It doesn't have the criteria for what a vaccine is. So will it pass in the future, or are they just getting away with it during this this emergency use for now?
Well, I think some of that depends on who's in power, because I mean, if it's being determined by the people in the Communist Party in China and Fauci and his cronies, they don't really care. They simply want to disband. And I think this is the problem they're running into. They're desperate. I mean, they're acting like, frenzied people, because the narrative is falling apart. Because they're getting, Omicron is such a nice Christmas gift, because it seems to preferentially go for the vaccinated and the boosted. I mean, that's what the Danish data tells us. The Danish data, which shows that 70% of those hospitalized right now are vaccinated, but over 90% of those with Omicron have been vaccinated and or boosted.
Yeah, well, this is something that we were warned, about by many scientists and doctors, that it will actually, get the virus will become worse, with this whole vaccination campaign that should not be implemented at all.
So, Dr. Yan, may I ask a question to Dr. Yan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
Okay. Dr. Yan, as you, make your way telling your story and also sharing what your research has demonstrated about the origins and the intent behind COVID-19. Is there anything that you think are maybe if you had to say there's 5 or 6 key messages or 2 or 3 key messages or 1 key message that you think everybody who is concerned about this, who is trying to be an activist citizen, who is just wanting to support the right moves, what do you think? I mean, there's such a sea of garbage that we're all kind of trying to deal with. But as you go through it, what's the most important thing from what you've seen that you would like the people who are listening to you today in Europe and the US and everywhere else to focus on?
Thank you, Omar. This is a very great question. And as I joined the Global COVID Summit to do the true speech in America, work with all those great doctors, Peter McCullough and Ryan Cole, Richard Urso, all these people, in my speeches, I keep telling people that what you need at this moment are 2 things. One is evidence, is the truth, and the other is courage. You just need these 2 things. It can help you solve everything. You are suffering from the COVID pandemic. You are suffering from the mandate policies. You are suffering from all the life changes since the beginning of pandemic, and you see it's like endless. You are desperate, you are frustrated, you are upset. However, we come here to tell you the evidence and the truth. We tell you why it happened, how it happened, and why you have such feeling, and how we could do to solve it, no matter it's from the disease or it's from the whole situation. You get all this, we are helping you, and we need you to work against the evil communism and also their partners, no matter it's Fauci or it's NIH or the other scientists who grab a lot of money from big pharmacy and promote you the misinformation, like using the vaccine can help you solve anything. All this, you just need to use your courage, stand up and fight against this kind of hilarious things. You have your freedom in speech. You have your human right. You have democracy, especially people in America and in almost all the countries in Europe. You are under the help of your constitution. These are the basic things you should have. You are not Chinese people living under Chinese communism regime. We are silenced and suppressed. The Chinese government tried to change America into China. And I'm here with people behind me. We are helping Americans to change China into America. This is the most important message I want people to know. And we can explain a lot in different topics to help people.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Cole asked me something similar. And I said, he said, with all the research and all the conversations, and I said, I distill it down to 3 simple things. One is stop testing, because the test is not telling you anything, and positive tests are not cases. Go with symptoms, treat people with symptoms. That's what Peter McCullough says. That's what Ryan says, Ryan Cole. That's what Professor Risch, that's what Dr. Chetty. Focus on the people who have the symptoms. In other words, or do proper testing. If you want to really see, but don't use a PCR test, then do a proper lab evaluation if you're unsure. Number 2, get early treatment out. Remember, it's an age stratified disease. Virtually nobody dies of it outside the vulnerable demographic. And so you can hardly say that when 99.7% is your recovery rate, that we are dealing with something that ought to change the world over poverty, over education, over suicide, over depression, over civil liberties, over autonomy. And if you think it does, let's have that debate, but you don't get to just assume it. And I think the third thing is the courage that Dr. Yan is talking about is the courage to not allow this playbook to come out for something else. I mean, I recently saw India saying, my God, the air pollution is really terrible this next week. Shall we go into lockdown? And I thought, oh my God, now every time the air pollution is bad, we're going to have lockdown. You see this playbook, this anti-science, evidence-free playbook that says somebody gets to tell you how to stop living as a way to deal with something which is not Ebola, which is not the Black Plague, anything but, where we would be better off getting our immune systems a workout so we can help it become endemic. That's what we have to take off the table. Because otherwise they're going to pull this stunt for everything. Climate control, let's have a lockdown. Let's have this, let's separate out those who agree and those who don't agree.
Yeah.
This is a slippery slope.
Absolutely. Thank you, Omar. And I think, with this whole misinformation campaign going on, and the fact that we are being called the people that spread misinformation, and not the opposite, but we of course know the truth. How are you dealing with that? Both in Sri Lanka and I know for you, Dr. Jan, it's been of course started in China, but now in the US. Because for me, it's definitely shocking that we are experiencing this kind of censorship and misinformation in our free world that we called free for so many years, at least for me, my whole life growing up. So how do you deal with that? Dr. Jan, you can start.
Thank you. So actually, I came to America because I want to tell the people in English and by myself that what happened and what we should do. Because as I said, I'm from China and I'm the scientist from China, doctor from China. So I totally understand how it works in China and what these people are thinking and their behavior, their patterns, all these things. And I can present this kind of medical intelligence to people to help them understand what's behind it and the Chinese government's aggressive needs. So that's why from last year until now, I keep going to different media, from Fox News to Newsweek and from Heritage Foundation to other mediums in UK, Spain, India, Italy, all over the world. And that is a way to help people understand what happened. This is to wake people up. And also, I keep working with, for example, legislators in America, and also people from intelligence department, including FBI, State Department, and CIA, Homeland Security, all these people. And also together with the many other scientists who actually very justice, and they also pursuing understanding what happened and to solve this pandemic. So I'm using different way to communicate and work with different people. As I said, we need to work all together because it's very urgent. The most important thing behind it is Chinese government using the military civil fusion network, not only in China, also infiltrated America, Europe, other countries, especially in scientific and academic field. So they are manipulating this, and they spent decades to develop such novel, unrestricted bioweapon using coronavirus. They celebrated trophy last year. And later on this year, 2021, they actually launched the new 5-year national strategies until 2025. And clearly the think tank in China provides all these kind of program strategies that how to use control and prevention of emerging infectious disease to help this communism regime to achieve their world dominance even before 2035. And as Omar just mentioned, very interesting, is he said people now start to call for lockdown when they meet some problems. See, that means people start to use to this kind of dictatorship. And that's why I always telling people, this virus, when China made it, they don't need to get high death rate immediately, like 50% people die or something. That's not good for transmission. Not good for transmission because people always control it on time. And they just using the low death rate virus spreading. First, you see, it destroys your medical system. Even you have treatment, but because of fear, panic, and also misinformation, people rush to hospital and it get paralyzed. And you get a lot of lockdown and other things, so your economic goes down. And later on, people start to change their opinions. They start to doubt the democratic regime. And they even feel the dictatorship is a very powerful way to help them to go through these fears and panic. That's why they said, oh, lockdown, let's do that. Mandate vaccine, let's do that. And even it cannot help anything, but they changed. And this is actually the high level of brainwash. And I'm from China again. I know this happened from your childhood. Keep brainwash, finally reconstruct your understanding of the whole world. And they are doing this, using it combined with misinformation and propaganda, went to Western countries. They want to destroy the Western civilization based on the Christian, because Chinese communism, the communism ideology from the day one is anti-Christ, is anti-God, anti-faith, anti-humanity, and they don't want people to love each other, trust each other. It won't control you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Yan.
On misinformation, I just have to say, I think there's macro and micro. One thing is that we were in an elevator earlier today and people started to come in. They were from Uzbekistan and they saw us wearing these idiot face nappies, as I call them, which we do just to be polite. And this woman started, and I said, please don't put that on for my sake. I was just doing it out of respect for you. They're utterly useless. And I say this to everybody I can, and they say, really, utterly useless? And then I'll bother to sit and talk a little bit about, would you try to protect yourself from anthrax wearing that mask or asbestos? No. I said, well, these particles are smaller. So there's no point playing that game. So Alexander Solzhenitsyn years ago said that basically the thing you have to do is not let lies go through you. That lies are like parasites too. They need a human host. And we have to just make sure the lies don't go through us. Even if we can't stamp every one of them out, we don't have to participate in them. On the slightly more macro level, I think the West has to also take a look at its lack of immunity to propaganda, wherever it comes from or wherever it came from. The book by RFK I mentioned talked about the fact that, many of us, C.J. Hopkins, who's a wonderful writer who picks up some of the same themes, said that he grew up at a time where Vietnam, which was a totally fake war that kept being intensified with each administration that came in, the assassinations of Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Dag Hammarskjöld before that, Watergate. I mean, we've all just been through the Iraq War, and you just see a situation where Tony Blair is in an £8 million mansion, whereas Assange is sitting in Belmarsh prison. So there has been an immunity. There has certainly pockets of civil liberties. You can speak. The Constitution technically here protects, and as Dr. Yan says, we have to use that protection. Otherwise, it will become meaningless. There's a thing called mass formation. We've talked about this before, that this professor from the University of Ghent talks about. And it shows that we are susceptible to propaganda when our social bonds are weak, number one. Number two, we basically don't have the richness of communication We have free-floating anxiety, and we don't know how to navigate that anxiety. So that's why the antidepressants, that's why we become enthralled to pharmaceuticals. And then we get aggressive. We get angry. And then if somebody gives us a narrative that says it's them, it's the unvaccinated,
yeah,
and I can take away your anxiety because I will give you the magic vaccine. And by the way, I'll make you stand at a distance and wear the face nappies and be all locked down and beat your pots and pans. Then you have a fake sense of belonging. And his argument was that we have some work to do, not only in terms of we have to tell the truth. Yes, we have to use our constitution. We need courage, but we need to repair our culture. We cannot have a culture that is simply based on mass distraction and Aldous Huxley's Soma pill. I mean, this is like Huxley meets Orwell. So
we need more presence, and people actually dealing with themselves, and not only sitting in front of the TV and listening to everything that is said there. We need people to actually, like you said, become braver. And I'm wondering if you, since this started, what do you feel has happened? How hard, I mean, we know a lot of people are sleeping and listening to this, but how can we wake them up? Do you have like any good suggestions or methods that you have been using yourself? And do you see an increase in people waking up around you?
Well, I'll say my bit, and Dr. Yan can give us her perspective. I've just found that it's almost like the drip torture. One of the things about mass formation is it's a hypnotic trance. So every time you drip a bit of the truth or a data or a fact or a counterfactual or something hope-giving or something that invites you to step forward, it might only jolt someone awake briefly before they again start putting the armor back on or dialing out the data that's inconvenient. But if the trance keeps being broken, then eventually people realize there is something else outside that trance. And I think I've just found that sometimes it's dispiriting because the same conversation you had, and then somebody and you're having the same conversation again, and it seemed like they agreed with you ultimately, but then the old instincts click back, and I think you just have to smile and you simply re-engage and provide a hospitality for the dialogue that the other side will never entertain. Because if this was a genuine medical disagreement, they would be welcoming conversations between the best minds and showing a comparison of data and clinical results. It's really funny that all the doctors on our side are the clinicians. They're the ones who actually deal with patients. Yeah. And the ones on the other side are modelers. Exactly. Or they're people who've never treated. I mean, almost no government task force has anybody who's ever treated a COVID patient on it.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's break the trance and somehow do it in a way that isn't a barrier. Mark Twain once said, it's much easier to fool people than get them to accept they've been fooled.
Yeah. Very true. Yes, go ahead.
I want to tell people that actually how to make people wake up is because we need to first have the real feeling about the pain. That is what I learned from Hong Kong pro-democracy protests. I can tell people I came from China, and when I moved to Hong Kong 8 years ago, I thought I already ran away from that system. And later on, when I became Hong Kong citizen, when I decided to have the long life, that kind of career pursuit, and also my whole family life in Hong Kong, they broke it down. And all those kind of painful experience at that time make me wake up. And I start to look for the information, more information, listen to different opinions. I need to think about, I have my logic thinking, I have common sense, I have seen the things, I feel the things. And all this finally tell me, woke up. And also, when I see what happened in the COVID-19, I understand it deeply than before. So for Americans, it's also the same. They cannot understand how evil communism or dictatorship is. But when COVID come to them, when they realize that the virus come from the military in China, and it was designed as novel bioweapon to attack you, to finally enslave you. So at that time, they feel pain. And when they see the misinformation, see all these kind of mandate policies, all those kind of hilarious things happen around them, they feel pain. And all these are the motive from our inside to let people pursue the truth. And also, actually, you have so many easy ways to do. You don't want them to control you. You don't want the misinformation and the censorship silence you. So you just need to find different sources and listen to different opinions. You don't need to believe us. You just listen, you go verify by yourself. We tell you why they have done that. And you go to use your logic thinking, you go to check by yourself and to understand it. And we tell you Chinese government designed that. And why has it done that? Why? What have they done? For example, I reconstruct the most proper way the Chinese military lab created this virus in the lab. And then later on, my report published, it received over millions of views and downloads. And many people, even they are not virologists, but when they read through, they checked over 100 of the reference paper I listed at the end of the article, and then they read through by themselves. Finally, I received the feedback that, oh yes, that's available. And yes, that can be done. It's like that there is smoking guns. So do it by yourself. Don't give up all your rights, no matter the rights of thinking, the right of listening, the right of speaking, or the rights of vote. Get your rights back. If you give it up, they will never return it back to you because they are so greedy. They want more, and you will be controlled.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Yan. Absolutely. And I remember, I mean, for those of us who did our research, we traced all of this back to Fauci and the money that had gone to the Wuhan lab. And you know, all of this information is out there, and it was always out there. So when people really start digging into this, they will find, you know, that there's so much that's not being brought up in the news, you know, including all the adverse reactions we see out there right now from the vaccines and so much more. So, you know, I'm so grateful that you both are doing an amazing job conveying all this information to the world and you know, being brave, because I know that a lot of doctors and scientists and people speaking the truth right now are being targeted. So it's difficult times, you know, for all of us in that sense as well. I wanted to just, you know, thank you so much, and also ask you if you have any final thoughts or words you wanted to share before the end.
Dr. Yan?
Okay, thank you. The final word I want to tell people is this virus is not from nature. It is a product from the Chinese Communist Party's long-term novel unrestricted bioweapon program. It took a lot of advantages from the weakness in your law systems. And you need to let your legislators understand what happened. You need to push them to fix these problems. Don't trust the Chinese Communist Party anymore. There is no chance it will change because the ideology, the communism ideology, is evil and anti-human. We do not have much time. We must stand up and fight against it, because for all the people we care about, for the safe future of ourselves and also our children, we must do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, my parting shot is first of all, just without repeating anything Dr. Yana said, because she said it so well, remember, everybody, that we set ourselves up for this. The writing was clear on the wall. This was fake from the beginning. We had an age-stratified illness of real danger to virtually nobody. We had tests ready before there was any, genomic sequencing done. We had a medieval system like lockdown that had never been used in history, where we put the healthy and locked them away. We had face masks, which up until 2019, all the medical fraternity said were useless. And we rushed vaccines through safety trials that were unprecedented and smothered easily available repurposed drugs with overwhelming efficacy and safety for only one reason, because you couldn't then have an emergency use authorization for this bioweapon. That's the only reason. And it was very clear that this thing that is less dangerous to children than influenza and tracks normal mortality is not the basis to blow up civilization. And while there are terrible actors who have preyed upon us and ideologies as have been described, we did the lemming dance. And the moment we say no, because the whole fraud is that it's for our own good. And so the moment enough people say, no, thank you, not doing it, don't buy it, will not participate, I want my constitution back. The moment enough people do that, they've lost. Because this is not Genghis Khan and his hordes. This is not Napoleon. This is not even, they might have the same intent. But today, because of the media, there's sick things about the media, but the good part is they can't hide it as easily if we will just look, as Dr. Yan has said. If we will give ourselves the challenge of getting educated. As I said, everything we've said, you can check out. And unlike the others who say, believe me, I say, oh, don't believe anything. But just go and connect the dots. And so that's my parting shot, that we're going to have a future that is as attractive as we are willing to be courageous and aware and alert and conscious.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Omar. We do not want to, live in a communist surveillance situation. So it's definitely,
or even an oblivious mass consumer economy being manipulated in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's time. It's really time to stand up and say no. So thank you both for your wisdom, for sharing your wisdom and your expertise, and for doing what you're doing. And I hope to have you both on again at some point.